Number 4.
I live in Singapore, where, among many things, we are well known for low crime rates, and a young woman like me can walk home safely, even at 2 a.m. However, as we all know, a low crime rate doesn't mean no crime. Despite being 28, I've often been chided for being far from streetwise and a little too trusting at times. A few months back, my friendliness came back to bite me. Having finished my closing shift, I headed for supper and took what I assumed was a shortcut home. My usual path goes past a few blocks of flats, a construction site, and cuts through a block, adding a few layers of protection. Also, it's well lit. The path I took that night, it wasn't. I wasn't afraid though, as I had my music on while I was heading home. But just then, I crossed paths with one of the construction workers from the site I walked by. He looked young and tanned, with a checkered shirt and a dark blue cloth wrapped around his middle. Some background information here. The foreign workers in our country have been treated with a mix of warmth and disdain. While many work harder than most to send money back to their families or for a better life for themselves, some have been known to make a public nuisance and even harass women. I was unfortunate enough to meet the latter that night. Out of politeness, I bid the young man goodnight before continuing on my way. During a lull in my music, however, I felt as if there were eyes on me. I turned to look around, and there was the man, standing at a half-meter from me, just smiling. Yanking out my earpieces, I turned around and walked a little faster, not breaking into a run. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, but when I turned around at a bend, my heart began to beat as if a mad drummer was using it for band practice, because the man, he was slowly walking in my direction, and he was still smiling. It was obvious. He was following me. I kept my eyes on the path, which thankfully led me to an open field where a basketball court flooded with lights was filled with people. Having read these stories, I decided to get their attention. Surely he would not be so brazen as to reach for me with so many potential witnesses. I called out to a few of the basketball players, asking them if Dad had come down yet. But just at that moment, 2 women jogged by with their dogs, and I waved to them as I tried to jog along. I sneaked another look, and he was a half a meter away from me once more, still smiling, still staring. I petted their dogs and made some small talk when they stopped for a break, before whispering to one woman, "Miss, don't look, but that man behind me, he's been following me from just now. Could you accompany me to the gate in front?" Beyond the gate was a 2-story house. Behind it was the path that led to my flat. I doubt I'll win any Academy Awards, but I sincerely hoped that the man brought my charade because I didn't want him following me back to my house. Thankfully, the woman complied, and once I stopped at the gate, I thanked them and walked as calmly as I could towards the house. Once I made another turn, I ran down the path, into the foyer, into the lift, and slammed the lift button for my floor, keys already in hand. Before I entered my house, I looked down, half expecting to see him there. But thankfully, he wasn't. I still kept checking from my bedroom window an hour after, still shaken. After spilling the whole thing to my best friend, she revealed that I wasn't the only person who had the experience in my area apparently. 4 other friends of hers who also lived around my residence had also been stalked by a construction worker. Whether it was the same man or not is anyone's guess. It took me a few hours to calm myself down before reporting it to the police. The woman on the line was initially sharp at me for the fact that I didn't report it at once, but eventually took my statement, gently yet firmly telling me not to be too friendly and to take another path from now on. On a more positive note, she said that she would send a squad to regularly patrol the area. I can only hope that the stalker is apprehended, and the next time he tries anything funny, it's an undercover cop who will take him down for good. I no longer take that path, even in the daytime.
Number 3.
I grew up in a family heavily involved with law enforcement, as both my mum and stepdad worked at our local DA's office as prosecutors. My stepdad still works there, while my mum switched jobs a couple of years ago. This incident happened about 8 months ago to my stepdad, who I'll be referring to in this story as Gus. It'll probably come as a surprise to most people that, generally speaking, the people defendants in criminal cases usually hate the most are not the prosecutor, but the defense attorney. I don't know if it's the fact that they have closer relations with them or what, but 9 times out of 10, that's usually the case. Victims, on the other hand, usually dislike the prosecutor. As such, this was the case for the woman that, for the sake of anonymity, I'll call Jessica. Jessica was a long-time customer, so to speak, of the criminal justice system. She had multiple prostitution charges against her, as well as drug charges and a couple of restraining orders against her on grounds of stalking. She was already well acquainted with Gus by the time that this story begins, as he had prosecuted her for a number of charges, which, true to my description earlier, she did not hold against him. This time, however, she came in as a victim. She was having trouble with a previous boyfriend of hers. He had, according to her in any case, been sending her threatening anonymous messages on social media, and she had come to the police wanting to arrest him on grounds of harassment, and she wanted it done immediately. She told this to Gus, and he calmly informed her that with her history and record for being dishonest with the court, her case may not hold up well in court, but that nevertheless he would conduct an investigation, albeit before arresting anyone, which is standard procedure if the perpetrator is technically unknown. Jessica, however, was unsatisfied, and she wanted him to send an officer to arrest her ex that instant, and when Gus said that that wasn't possible, she snapped. I'm a bit hazy on the details, but from what I can recall, she had gotten into a big tussle, kicking and screaming, and just generally pitching a fit right there. Eventually, I believe they had to get security to take her out. Fast forward a week. My mum and I at the time were staying in a city about an hour away from our hometown. This was due to medical reasons I had at the time that I don't really want to go into. But we received a phone call. My cell phone has the same number that our old home landline did, so many of the calls I receive are actually meant for my mum, for business and such. This call, it was intended for her. However, this time it was a police officer calling, which was unusual but not unheard of. I handed the phone over to Mum and continued playing on the computer. It wasn't until I heard my mum's upset sounding voice frantically trying to reach Gus, however, before I became worried. I asked her multiple times what was going on, and I remember her refusing to answer me at first, instead focusing on dialing, which only served to make me even more scared, but eventually she told me. It turns out that Jessica had a few mental illnesses, probably anger issues of some sort, though there could also be others. She had been texting her therapist for a while with death threats towards my stepdad, and described in detail how she was going to kill him. It didn't get truly horrifying, however, until the discovery that Jessica actually lived just around the corner from Gus and knew where he lived. My mum said that she had texted her therapist a picture of her standing outside of his house, holding a gun. She was serious. Luckily, the therapist quickly relayed the information to the police station, and they sent a number of cops over to Gus's house to collect her. She ended up in a mental health unit at the local hospital for about a week before she was deemed stable enough to be released. That was the scariest incident that happened, and I wish I could say that that was the last we ever heard of her, but unfortunately, it isn't. While Jessica's creepy, stalkerish hatred is sometimes redirected, for a while she was actually following one of the police officers, she always seems to lock back onto Gus in the end. She recently started sending death threats to him again upon her arrest for an unrelated crime, which Gus hadn't even heard about until she threatened him. Luckily, no more incidents like the gun one have happened so far, but I'm always a little nervous now when I go to his house, especially now that she knows where he lives. Just goes to show, there are some scary people out there, and many of them are very, very unreasonable.
Number 2.
When I was 13, in the 8th grade, I was a volleyball player. I'll admit it, I wasn't the best. I could serve well, and I had alright ball control, but I couldn't set the volleyball to save my life. Anyways, that's kind of beside the point. We only had 7 players on my team, so it was easy to learn their names, interests, styles, groups of friends, etc. This is also around the time when my boyfriend and I started dating. He always came to my games in the 7th grade, so I knew he'd be supporting me then too. My first game of the season came and went pretty quickly. I don't remember much, just that we lost horribly. But I was alright with it because my boyfriend Alex was there to lift my spirits while the rest of the team wallowed in their own mistakes. During the second game though, the very first time I went to serve, A man a few feet behind me cheered. I was excited. Nobody had ever cheered me on before, so it was kind of nice. Alex just gave me this goofy grin and giggled from the other side of the gym. I smiled and then served. A few more games passed, and the man continued to cheer me on every time I served, bumped, or spiked the ball. It got a little bit embarrassing at times, considering I didn't even know the guy, but I just let it happen. I assumed that this must have been Alex's dad or something. I'd never met him before, so it made sense that I wouldn't recognize him at first. Alex always talked about how much of an amazing girl his dad said I was, and that he was excited for when he got to meet the girl who was the only light in his son's dark, lonely world. We won our 4th game, the first win in the season. Our whole team was ecstatic. I decided that because I was in such a good mood, I should introduce myself to Alex's father. It was a short and simple conversation. I walked over and immediately confirmed who he was, and he indeed was Alex's dad, just as I had thought. His name was Mark. He talked about how pleased he was to meet me and how great I was at volleyball.
"You should be on a higher team,"
he said.
"I sure hope you plan to try out next year. I think you have a great shot at varsity."
I thanked him and left, thrilled to know that Mark approved of me. After our next game, I noticed that Alex didn't leave with Mark, and his mum was out of state. I was curious. Alex said that both of his parents were biological, so why wouldn't he leave with him? We planned to hang out later that day also, so he would never have gone home with any of his other friends. A little curious now, I started watching Mark after each game. He was always there, cheering me on, even though Alex wasn't. Every time he left, he got into a white Suburban with 2 children in the back seat. They looked familiar, but I couldn't put my finger on as to who I knew them from. Alex stopped being able to come to my games because of football, but Mark was always there, sitting in the exact same spot, yelling my name across the gym. I asked my mum if she knew another Mark other than my dad. She said no. I then proceeded to tell her about what he would be doing during the game. She told me I was just being paranoid, but that he was probably just bored of waiting for Alex in his car, so he came to watch me play. I'll be the first to say that I'm a pretty paranoid girl, but I just knew something didn't quite add up here. Mark started showing up to watch me practice, even when Alex didn't have football that day. He was always there. I stopped talking to him, thinking it was best I didn't get involved with whatever crack lab this dude was running here. I kept a close eye on him too. He didn't try to interact either. He just watched me. You can imagine my relief when volleyball season was finally over. I wouldn't have to see Mark's creep of face, and I could live a panic-free rest of the year. Alex constantly invited me to his house, but I was sort of scared to go. I just told him that my parents wouldn't let me. About a week after my last game, I was walking out of my school when I noticed a familiar car parked in the lot. A white Suburban. It was Mark's car. He beckoned me over frantically, and I ran through the rain and stopped about a yard or 2 in front of his car. He rolled down the window and told me to get in and that he would drive me home. I turned down the invitation, then turned and started walking towards home, the 2 backseat kids' faces still bothering me about their familiarity. Every day, Mark would be parked outside of my school, leaning against the hood of his car. He wouldn't say anything or gesture to me. He just watched. I had enough of this guy. Standing in front of Alex, I turned to him and said, "So I met Mark after one of my games a few weeks ago." He looked confused, then asked who Mark is. "Isn't that your dad's name?" I asked. "I mean, he's standing over there." I pointed to him. Alex's face went blank. Then he began to drag me towards the school doors. I asked him what was wrong, but he refrained from saying anything until we got inside. He just continued to stare at Mark. "My dad's name isn't Mark, and he's out of state right now," he told me, still staring outside. I didn't know what to say. If this wasn't Alex's dad, then who was he? Alex stayed with me until my mum's car pulled in front of the school, and when we got in, Mark also got into his Suburban. We both left at the same time, but I was relieved when he took a different turn than us. For about a week, Mark was always parked outside of my school, leaning against the hood of his car. Still, he said nothing. He just watched us, observed me. I would have called him out for basically stalking me, but I guess my anxiety was just too high back then. After that week of him just sitting in the parking lot, I didn't see him again for about 2 or 3 days, but a part of me knew that this wouldn't be the last time I saw him. I began receiving messages from a restricted number. I didn't even want to look at them, but curiosity got the better of me, and I soon caved in and looked. The first picture that was sent was of me in one of my classes doing my work. The second one was of me and Alex hugging, a few of my close friends around us. But what scared me though was that I was the only person in these photos that did not have their eyes scratched out. I was about to show my parents the pictures, but I knew that they would never believe me. All of my life, whenever something bad happened, they just passed it off. They just said I was looking for attention. I deleted the pictures. Later that night, I got a call from a restricted number. Thinking it was one of my friends, restricting their number like they always do, I answered. I immediately recognized Mark's voice, but this time he called himself my Uncle Larry, and that he had a birthday present for me, if I'd just go and meet him. I said that I didn't care who the fuck he was, and he should just leave me alone. He sighed and then hung up. Not 5 minutes later though, I got a new picture message from him. It was as if he was sitting in the tree outside of my window, able to get a perfect shot of me changing clothes. I ran to my window and looked out, and through the branches of the tree, I saw a white Suburban parked in front of my house. The next time he called, I answered with something along the lines of, "Whoever the hell you are, just go away and leave me alone, or I'll have my parents deal with you." From his slightly tinted car window, he looked up into my window where I was standing and said,
Silly girl, I know you're home alone. Now, come out here and let Uncle Larry give you your birthday present before I have to come in there myself. After all, I know it's your special day on Friday.
I hung up on him, then ran to lock every door and window I knew about. I remember locking myself in my closet and crying for who knows how long. After this, I never heard anything again. But about a year or two ago, I heard that he was arrested. Apparently, those 2 children in his back seat had been missing for nearly 10 years. What would have happened if I had gotten into his car that day? Would I have been featured in Amber Alerts across the country, just like those other 2 were? Maybe it's best that I don't know. Maybe it's best that I just move on from that situation. He's gone now, and I'll never have to see his face ever again. I've slept with my blinds closed ever since.
Number 1.
It all started when I was 7. My mum and dad had been separated for a while, and my mum chose to introduce me to her new boyfriend. We'll call him Brian. He seemed pretty fun for about a year and a half, but after a while, I started being abused by him in various ways. I never knew it was a bad thing, as he liked to call it special time, and I wasn't allowed to tell anyone. I never thought much of it, and he didn't hurt me at first. As I got older, things became worse though, and by the time I turned 11, I realized that special time wasn't special at all. I wanted to start telling people about it, and I think he knew that. One day, I was mustering up the courage to tell my mum when he pulled me aside and showed me a gun. It was a revolver of some sort, and he showed me that the bullets were inside. He said,
You tell anyone, and I'll make sure all of these go in your head. You got it.
I was mortified. I didn't know what to do apart from nod, and I kept quiet about all of it. About a month later, the police raided my mum's house and arrested Brian. My mum told me to go to my room and to stay quiet. After a while, a cop came into the room. She was nice and talked to me for a bit, asking me random questions about my toys, until she started to ask me about Brian. I knew what she was trying to ask me about, and after a bit, I became a blubbering mess and told her everything. She wrote everything down and afterwards brought me into the lounge room, saying to a man in a suit, "This one was affected too." As she said this, everyone fell silent in the room before searching the house and eventually leaving. The next day, my mum took me to the police station and we waited in a room where at least 20 other kids were. My mother, she silently cried the whole time, and I tried giving her hugs, but she seemed too numb to notice. After a while, I was called into a room, and to my dismay, my mum wasn't allowed to come with me. There were 2 couches and a lot of teddy bears and toys around. I picked up my favourite toy and sat down, answering all of the questions that I was asked by 3 different adults. After a while, I was allowed to go back to my mum, and we just went home. It turns out that Brian molested over 30 children using the status of being my mum's boyfriend and my new dad as a disguise for what he did. He affected children at parties, babysitting, and even broke into some children's bedrooms at night until someone finally spoke up. My mum told me he wouldn't get out until I turned 25. Only 14 years for over 30 children just seemed like an injustice, but at least he was rotting in jail, I decided. When I was 16, my mum died of cancer. Not many people came to the funeral, just what was left of my family. I had already done quite a bit of mourning, so at that time I was just a bit numb to the tears. But one thing I did feel was that I was being watched. I just felt like someone couldn't keep their eyes off of me. I tried to shake it off as just being upset over my mother's death, but I couldn't. So, in the middle of my aunt's speech, I decided to glance around, and there he was. It was Brian, and he was smiling. That smile, it was just too big. I grabbed my grand's arm and shook it really hard, and she looked and saw him too.
"There's nothing we can do about it right now,"
she said, and turned back to the funeral. But I just couldn't turn away. His smile, it just captured me, and not in a good way. My mum was buried, and we all started to depart. My uncle had to grab my arm and pull me away because I didn't want to leave her while he was there. I didn't know why, but later on, my fears were justified. That night, there was a knock on my grand's door. She checked through the peephole and screamed, scrambling to pick up the phone.
"What is it?"
I said. She wouldn't reply, so I chose to look out through the peephole instead. And there was Brian, smiling. But the smile isn't what got me. What got me, though, was what he was holding in his arms. It was my mum. I was hysterical and fell to the floor, screaming and crying at the same time. The cops came in less than 10 minutes, but by then, my mum and Brian, they were gone. The cops explained to me that he got out early for good behaviour. They never found him or my mum, and I wish I could say that this is where it ended, but it isn't. For the past 3 years, he sent me letters saying how nice my mum is and that the next bullets are coming to my head. I've also seen him here and there, walking home and seeing him watch me behind trees, seeing him riding a bike in front of my house, and even standing on my front lawn. I have called the cops every single time, but they never show up on time, and they've never caught him. And just before I decided to share this story, I saw Brian on the front lawn again, staring at my window and smiling that big fucked up smile. I really, really hope they catch him soon. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video guys. I don't know what it is, but Stalker stories always just seem to get under my skin. How about you guys? Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their story for us all here, and I hope you're all doing really well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. And as always, keep them coming guys, as this channel relies upon your stories to continue. Also, please do me a favour and just state in your email, if you decide to send one, what your story is about in the description, and also provide me with a short written statement of consent, just so that I can be above board with everything. Also, please remember to tell me in the email if you'd like to remain anonymous, and change any names if you don't want particular names to be shared. So, as I mentioned in a previous video guys, I'm actually looking for particular stories for feature videos. So 2 video genres I've been wanting to cover are hacking stories and social media stories. I do have a couple of hacking stories now, and there have been a couple of social media stories coming in, but I probably will need a little bit more before I can make these videos. The social media stories can be anything from Facebook, Twitter, Omegle, Kik, Snapchat, dating apps, really anything guys. So if you have a story that would fit under either of these genres, I would love to hear from you. But remember, even if you don't have these types of story, please continue to send your stories in anyway. As always, it would be awesome if you could like, share, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates throughout the week. You can also catch me on my second gaming channel, all of which have links in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you mates in the next one.